We are lighting the candle, a world that works. And I am Bill Carell, and I am here with my two amazing friends and co hosts, Lisa Sheehan and Jan Jeremias. Every week we get together and we have conversations, some of which are ideas that I come up with, some are by other people, and we just talk. We sort of, share our thoughts and more or less just kind of riff off of each other's comments. I think the interesting thing about this week is it's just going to be the three of us. Ken is going to be otherwise engaged for a little while. So what I'm looking forward to is a fresh direction, um, and maybe some thoughts that we might have with regard to, I don't know, the climate out there with regard to people getting along, the climate out there with regard to people helping each other, the climate out there with people giving service. And I'd also like to maybe, toss into the mix of this stew of ideas. How about how people are about receiving and giving? So, Jan, I'd like to just ask you, is that something that you think may have some meat on it that we could work with?
Yes, I think so. I think there are some good nuggets there.
Excellent. I went shopping special for you.
I know. It was my birthday Saturday, so
It was.
yeah,
Happy
yeah.
belated birthday.
Thank
Happy
you,
birthday.
thank you. Yeah,
Remember that old saying, you're not getting older, you're getting better?
Mhm.
thank you. I think I need to hear that.
Yeah. Well, the next one's going to be the big 7-0 for me. So on the one hand, I'll be the second person in my family's lineage to get to that level. Well, third actually, because my mom got to no, she got to 79. Oh, good Lord. I can't keep it straight. You know what I'm saying? And my dad, he made it to 88. He would have been 89 3 months later. But 70 is a big number in our family. Not many of us have gotten here before. Kind of uncharted territory. So, with regard to the aforementioned list of subjects, is there anything that just kind of speaks to you? Or maybe we can take a pause and see what comes.
I love this idea of, how can we treat others better and how can we come to a place where even if we don't agree with people, we at least can be civil and um so even if you're not open to listening to people, like, I mean, I would love to say be open to hearing what people have to say, to listen, and then, but even if you're not there, can you just allow them their right to speak or to feel the way they feel? And I'm not saying that's easy, because when people have very dramatic and very negative actions or whatever, it's kind of hard to stay neutral or whatever. But at least in the realm of conversation or just in the realm of normal daily life, because I think we've lost that. I don't think people have that sort of underlying feeling of just the fact that people are human beings, or all beings anymore.
Would you have a specific example that you might be able to toss out for us to really take a close examination? I want to hear more, if you will.
About an example of not, or an example of how to.
Either what you'd like to see in the world or what you see that's missing.
Okay, so I listened to a really interesting podcast this morning, put out by a woman. I think she was the director of the Heart Math Institute. Heart Math is a way of meditation of breathing. It's a heart focused breathing, and it talks about basically, resonance with other people and resonance within yourself. And what changes is your heart rate changes to much more like a smoother kind of transition, as opposed to when you're agitated and it's very jagged. And they call it heart coherence. Um, and they talk about doing that with other people, but this whole podcast was about animals and this ability of, in the experiments they did, where they actually had a boy who was 14 who literally, was separated from his dog, two different rooms, and then they put them together. And his direction was that he was supposed to just send loving energy to this dog without touching it. And both of their heart rates smoothed out. And there was this heart resonance that happened. And it was pretty amazing to me that they weren't even touching. So it didn't have anything to do with touch necessarily, or that him petting him or holding him. It had to do with just him being in the same space as him. And so they had on this vet who was talking about is now having this global movement to kind of course, I would love it because it talks about pets, but this global movement where they're actually trying to cultivate that because that animals have the ability to break down barriers. Like you can get the biggest, highest exec, and if he has like if you give him a kitten, or a puppy, all of a sudden they melt and they're just like, oh. And I gave a workshop yesterday, and one of the guys who was on is an ex army medic, and he did
Mhm.
3 tours of active duty. And he said he was at one debriefing or something where he had to speak, and it happened to be that it was in a place where they were exchanging a bridge between the two sides, and there was a lot of agitation. And there had been a dog that had gotten caught on the bridge, and it just turned out the dog was ready to deliver. So they saved the dog, and the dog gave birth. So he said, there we are in this meeting with like 10 puppies running around us. And then the commander told them that they each had to pick up a puppy, and how all of a sudden it took like the stress level from up here, like went whoosh. And so he gave this debriefing. He said, holding a puppy. He said it was one of the highlights of that tour of duty that he did was that moment. But that's what I'm speaking of is like, can we at least be in a space where we can, I don't know, with your enemy, it might be hard to send love, but could you not send hate? Might be a good place to start.
So I also wonder while you're speaking if people have any idea what they're automatically sending unconsciously,
Absolutely.
like, Lisa, that's a remarkable example, but I don't think we can bring a dog that's about ready have a litter, to all of our stressful situations. But
Yeah.
what would be like another method, to kind of play that out a little bit and lighten the load and make things a little bit more jovial and a little bit more, shall we say, fun?
Well, as the university loves to do, I was watching a TED talk, and this woman was she draws quite well, and she does stories with them and stuff like that. And so she had the audience turn. She had a piece of paper, and everybody had a piece of paper and a pencil, and they had to look at each other and draw each other's faces without moving their pencil. And they all got a kick. But the point of it was to look at each other, which her thought is that we don't do that enough. And in fact, she saw a sign on the side of the road, a guy that made boots, and there's this tall, thin guy with a handlebar mustache, and all his hunting kills all of, and she's a devout vegan, but she spent the day with him and drew him and stuff like that, and then wrote the story about him, and then it was published in a according to him, a fake news outlet. But he put it up in a frame, and it's now hanging amongst his trophies, hunting trophies on the wall kind of thing. So, there was like a common denominator. So she asked him about his stuff. He was so eager to tell his story to her. He'd lost his wife recently and all this other stuff, but just to reach out, just to look, like Jan said, it's not even touching each other. It's paying attention to each other and looking, like sincerely looking at each other and being
Yeah.
inquisitive. So I think that, obviously that's a losing art. And she actually did during the pandemic, she offered to draw because she was at such a loss that her whole career was being with other people and she couldn't do it. So
Right.
her mother said to do an online class with kids to teach them how to draw. So, she did, it was very rudimentary, and her mother was holding up the phone, and they hit go live, and she expected 100. There were 12,000 children waiting to do 5 minutes of drawing. And so she did it for 30 minutes a day for months and months and months. and there was thousands of kids, and there she showed the pictures and stuff, and just that connection, you know? Hi, Tonka.
Yep.
Yes,
Yeah. He's voicing his opinion on what we're talking about at the moment.
Yeah.
I think he's in violent agreement with you, Lisa.
Yes, I agree. And I think you're right, Lisa. I think there is a lost art of being able to actually look people in the eye and whatever. There was also a beautiful um story I heard also on a podcast about this French, I think he's French, this French photographer or artist who does murals on like big murals. And he went in and he did this whole thing where he went into a prison. And I think he went into a prison in California and basically they did a mural and they actually, from what I gather, is I think they Xeroxed the photos and they were putting them up on like this wall. And how one is, he only did it in a particular population of prisoners, but how just, one is a group of people doing something and being in each other's presence where it's not threatening. And then actually having, I guess, certain um, correction officers actually participated. And he said it's nothing like sharing an experience like that where like can you pass me the glue, like very trivial things amongst people who definitely don't communicate, you know and um from what I remember, he talked about the relationships and how some of these, and then they showed, I guess, the whole project to their families. And some of these guys have kids they've never met, like kind of thing. And so they got to see and sort of like connect with people outside, like their families outside the prison. It was pretty amazing.
I love that. And as you're both speaking, what I'm hearing is that like the definition of service to me is being in action, supporting people in what would be normally joyful and blissful for them. And so if you are looking at service like something you have to do or something that you're doing in order to get something else, or you're doing it simply because of who the person is and you'd rather be doing almost anything else in the world, that wouldn't be service. Service would be where you're lost in the action. There is an exchange of energy, there is a common language being discovered and kind of developed as the thing goes along. And then it gets to the point where you can't tell who's being served and who's serving, which is when it's really working. It's like, we've all got inspirational puppies between us, and that'll be like a new buzzword for me. Uh, you know, Jan, grab a puppy.
That's right. Grab a puppy. I do all the time,
Yeah.
But there is this, uh, and you have it. I mean, when I hear the same thing when you talk about your grandchildren, Bill, is that ability to kind of break down the facades of who we are and the fact that we feel like we have to present ourselves in a certain way. And animals, puppies, close friends, people maybe you've known your whole life tend to be able, you tend to let down your guard a little bit, which I think is what happens. I think that people have built up such a strong wall, a guard around themselves out of fear or, whatever they're afraid of, change, light, whatever. And they've built that wall. So letting who they really are kind of come out is not nurtured in any way.
It's interesting that you said that. And what comes to mind way back when I was working in corporate in the 1980s, there were a few people that when they got up to address the rest of the group in a meeting, I could actually see them staring into space, looking at an outline that they were constructing right above their head with their talking points in it. And as they went through it, if somebody asked a question, it got them upset and off their outline, and they'd have to go back and figure out where they were in it. It was really kind of comical. And these are very intelligent people with tons of experience, and that was probably a method that they had decided to get their ducks lined up ahead of time and tick them off, and then make sure that they covered all the things that were important, as opposed to some folks that I watched who were just plain comfortable having a conversation with people. I worked with a beautiful man. His name was Harry Kenworthy, and he was a professor at RPI, and a professor in engineering, and he in physics. He became division vice president at the company that I worked for, and when he came in, it was just off the cuff conversation, and you knew he was really great in terms of having a complete idea of what he wanted to deliver and communicate and make sure it was understood. But the difference was with him was the making sure it was understood. And how he did that is he always completed a sentence by asking a question. And he say, like, the number one thing this quarter is going to be focusing on safety. Does anyone have any ideas about the best way forward and what we might want to look at first? So every time he made an affirmative statement, there would be a follow-up question that he would ask to engage people and get their minds working. It was really effective.
Yeah, I've been taking a course it was a small class called Flow Speaking. And this guy's an expert at just and the prompts are what start everything. So like one of them is like I have a voice and you just keep finishing that sentence over and over again. And there's a variety of the sentences, and then we get in peer groups and do that sort of practice. And it's amazing how deep you can go when you do it more, keep repeating the same thing because you run out of things to say, and then you release your tension and your fears and stuff like that. And so it's kind of an interesting way to get to talk to people.
It's like something we used to do in Boy Scouts. I'm going on a camping trip, and on this camping trip, I'm going to bring, water, and then the next person goes, and right around the circle. It's just a whole lot of fun. Everybody was engaged and having fun, and every once in a while, somebody would wisecrack, and they'd say extra toilet paper for Bozo because we know the problem he has, blowing his nose.
And the other thing is people get creative because you don't want to say the same thing someone else said. So all of a sudden you're there, and Tommy across the way says what you were going to say, and you're like, oh no, now I can't say that. And so you start to think on your feet of like, okay, what else would I bring? And so it kind of sparks that very creative, even silly kind of energy that kind of makes you pause and say, okay, well, what could I bring? I'll bring a puppy.
And one of the other points is that nothing is wrong or incorrect, so you let go of all your inhibitions and stuff like that. So it could be funny, it could be serious, it could be deep, it could be anything. So that kind of, it does it helps you let your guard down, I think that.
And there's something you said, I think, when you first started speaking, Jan, that resonated with me. And there's a concept in terms of being in service to people, and the first thing that you want to do is you want to grant them being. Who they are right now is perfect just the way that it is. There's nothing to do and nothing to fix and nothing to change, okay? So part of the challenge of that is to have people come into your space that are angry, about something that you know nothing about. And there were some crutch phrases and questions to ask in that situation that would neither put spin on it and hype their tension or try to make it all right or better. It was more or less something like somebody walks in and they say, I am so pissed about my cab ride over. And, like most people would say, well, it's okay now. You're going to be fine. It's going to be good. Okay. Or, yeah, those cab drivers are horrible in New York City, aren't they? Those would be the two extremes. But the answer to it is to not add anything to it and say, yeah, and how do you feel now? Or,
That
yeah,
kind
I get that way too. What's it going to be like for you, going forward here?
Well, we take an element of that like every time, I teach a class, because it's not even how you come in. It's like, can you invite that part of yourself in? So it's not, it's like this ideal of, can you invite all the parts of yourself here into this, into this experience? And this idea of, I think, accepting. So if you get angry, is, for some of us, we spend a little, I'm guilty of that. Spend, or was brought up like that. You spend hour and hours denying that that's the way you feel, because you're not supposed to feel like that for some reason. It's not the way you're supposed to feel, so you spend a lot of energy like keeping it out and trying not to let it come in, which, obviously makes it like, then it's definitely not going away because you're spending so much time creating this barrier or this wall against it. So can you actually, when somebody comes in and you're like, could you actually even have them explore that? Like, how does that make you feel? Like, what
Yeah.
comes up for you? Kind of interesting.
Yeah, yeah, and the next line in that caveat is, and never get caught. And so that once you've let your feelings out in public, it's the same thing as getting caught. You've turned yourself in, you've given them the upper hand or the advantage or whatever all that stuff was, do what the other kids are doing, but don't get caught.
Feelings are one of the things I'm not even sure what the podcast was talking about, but for some reason, all of a sudden, it came to me as a statement that my feelings are valid, and it dawned on me that I wasn't always treating myself that way.
Mm-hmm.
So if you start like everybody's feelings are valid,
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing. And now that I've realized mine are, it kind of opened my eyes that everybody's feelings are valid. It was a weird juxtaposition. Like I just couldn't, I never, my brain never twisted in that way before. Though it sounds so simple, it was like an odd, you know, learning for me.
Yeah, our social culture, Lisa, tends to collapse feelings on top of facts. So facts are something you can independently verify, and they're either correct or they're incorrect or they're explainable. Feelings are a completely different domain. Feeling's a feeling, It's kind of like might have been gas. I mean, who knows? It's just a feeling. So share the feeling and maybe get into it a little bit and find out if there's a way to communicate, what that feeling is like for you that other people can relate to.
I think that would be like a huge opening for communication. You know what I
Oh
mean?
yeah.
Like I just so looking and exposing your feelings,
No, absolutely. Because I think that, like I mentioned, I mean, I grew up in a house where you're not supposed to feel like that.
Mhm.
And so, you know, denying it and then actually saying to yourself, well, I do, and that's valid because that's the way, then getting to the point where you may not understand it and I may not be able to explain it, but this is how I feel. And being okay with that, being
Yes.
okay that somebody else may not understand because they're not you. And the other
Right.
thing it does is I think that I listened to another podcast one day, and she said, the guy said, we live under the assumption that people are supposed to understand us. Like that's the assumption we make that, somebody out there is supposed to understand me. And that's really the wrong, like we can't have that assumption because they're not us. So having that assumption and being okay with the fact that that's the way you feel and no one has to understand that. Like it might not be rational for somebody else because they haven't had your experiences. But does that
They
really
even
matter?
yeah, and they extended it to like parent child. Like if the child feels a certain way and expresses it to the parent, like the way I grew up was like you brushed it under the rug. You didn't say it first of all, but then if you did, you brushed it under the rug, or a distraction or some other clever little thing. But they said if you, even if you don't think you did anything wrong, or you didn't realize it was going to do that to the child, you still, like, acknowledge their feelings and then move on, that kind of thing, instead of just ignoring what happened.
There's another step in there called acceptance. Okay, that a feeling is something that tacitly should just be accepted as something you may not even understand right this second, but it's just
Mhm.
there, might be something to explore to get to know yourself a little bit better, or the person you're with to explore with them, or just be watch their behavior, and see if something comes out about it that gives you a better understanding. But acceptance is really cool. Valid, is like it's okay, but now what do I do with it? But maybe there's nothing to do with it. Maybe you just accept it and move on.
Exactly. I mean, for me, I think that one of the things I've worked, I when I was working through different things and finally accepting that I had certain feelings or felt certain ways at certain times was one, not feeling the need to articulate it necessarily because I
Mm,
maybe couldn't explain it. And then for me, it became very much a somatic experience. So it was like, okay, where do I feel it?
Mm.
And then could I work through it that way? Could I somehow process it that way? And then sometimes when I couldn't articulate it over time, it would bring me to a place where then all of a sudden I could articulate it. And part of it was me kind of maybe owning it and accepting it and kind of being one with it. I mean,
yeah.
to some extent. I mean, the other thing with feelings is I think we label ourselves as, Thich Nhat Hanh, I think always says, the Tibetan Buddhist meditation teacher used to always say, remember that you say that, he always say, you would say, there is anger within me, but I'm not angry because you're not saying that anger is all you are. Like you are not anger.
Emotion, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the emotion is within me. There's anger within me, or jealousy, or sorrow, or sadness, but that's not all of who I am. Is that one emotion? And I always keep that in mind. It's like this is not all that I am.
Yeah, it's different to say I am fat than it is to say I am hungry, you know? One may be accurate and the other one probably not, but it's kind of telling. I think in Jerry Maguire, there was this sentence that was said, which I think explains the whole thing between men and women as far as I knew in the 70s and 80s. And this is where what's her name is saying about Jerry, I love him. I love him. I love him for the man he almost is, and I love him for the man he wants to be. What? It's like, no, I love you for everything you are and everything you aren't, But as far as I was concerned, that was like you had me at hello kind of a sentence it was intended to be. But I think it showed how broke, the relationship be, men are from Mars and women are from Venus kind of a thing. And, she's betting the farm that he's going to grow up and be something special because he sure as hell ain't that right now.
Mhm.
So, again, when we're talking about all of this behavior, it's about cultivating these habits so that they're part of your nature, of your way of being, and not something that you have to technique. So it's inauthentic if you have to go back. The crutch phrases are there for a little while. Everybody needs to have training wheels while they're learning to do something before it becomes part of your nature and who you are. But I think before you start with everything, you really have to make your mind up that you want this to turn out in a particular way. You really want this to be a new state of being for yourself. And, the whole notion of, well, everyone is okay. You're going to get a lot of arguments about that. You're just not going to get into a group of 15 or 20 people and everybody's going to agree with you. I
No?
don't know. What do you think?
Okay. I always said the world would be a better place if everybody just to remember that I'm always right, kind of thing.
That was my mother's sentence. We're
I
going to
can see
get along a lot better when you just give up.
right, right. I was going to say that sounds like something a mother would say.
Yep. right after she says, because I said so.
Oh my gosh, that phrase, because I said so. That's
Yep.
why.
Talk about negating feelings, right?
Right.
Invalidating, yes.
Yeah.
Lack of acceptance, total rejection into the trash heap.
But even like the accepting of my own feelings, because it was even like I just applied it last weekend. Like something my sister did bothered me, and normally I would just like either make something up in my head or not even approach her on it. And I did, and I learned a lot more. We talked it out. It worked out well. I learned out what the real, the underlying reason was instead of the ones I was making up in my head, kind of thing. So it was very interesting.
Yeah, the fundamental skills that we're given by age of 12 is we have the following questions. What's wrong with me?
Mhm.
What's wrong with you? And what's wrong with it, the system? There's something wrong around here. We just got to figure out where exactly the source is, And then the next kind of like aha moment at some point in your life, you go, if you're looking for something to be wrong, you're always going to find it, What if there's nothing wrong? Now
Right.
what?
And along with that, Bill, what comes to, was, when you say acceptance, to me, the word that comes to mind is ownership, is that like you own it. And um, it's, that idea of when you realize that, you can't blame someone else for your life. Like, like you're saying, it's not the system, it's not, they have to take some sort of ownership or responsibility, whether that be just for you, like, your own attitude, or which is obviously, but just everything. Like, it's very easy to, for a long time, I think we think everything, nothing is all, it's all everybody else. Like, my parents did this, I had siblings, I didn't have siblings. Like,
Oh yeah, I think that's even I stopped reading horoscopes because even that could do something to you. Like, oh my god, it's going to be a horrible day, or it's going to be a great day, or it's going to be, and just because of the stupid printed words I read in a newspaper that applied to 12 million other people.
similar thing happened to me, Lisa. I'm laughing because I did that too, where I used to read it, and then I finally thought to myself, like, how much is this like coloring my perception of my day, like just by reading these few words?
And it does to people. It's the simplest things what you let your mind take hold of. I mean, even your daily habits. Like, I can't function without coffee. Yes, you could. You did before.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
did pretty okay until you started drinking coffee, right?
exactly.
It worked. But it's funny, you start talking about the things that people are tuned into, and they've already made decisions about whether or not they're going to be good for them. And to go back to like the earliest conversations, watching my two girls get to the point where they had language and they wanted to know if something was okay or not okay. And Heidi was very visceral. It was, does it bite? So there's two phylum, the biters and the non-biters, okay? And Becky was a little bit more subtle, at the age of 1.5 or 2. It was, can you pick it up? Is it safe, right? So when you think about how we do stuff like that, and the whole idea of a notion that and the great philosopher Jimmy Buffett, some people claim that there's a woman to blame, and that just is the epitome of it. So the neat thing is we went out to dinner, and we sit at the bar, 2 or 3 places that we go to because it's social, and we have a whole bunch of friends. It's just like Cheers, and the bartenders know us really well. So everyone cleared out, and Jan and I are sitting there. A bartender comes over and she goes, I got to ask you a question. And I said, well, what is it? And she said, do you believe in tarot cards? And I said, believe in tarot cards. And I said, no, it's kind of like a toy, like Ouija board. And she said, no, Ouija boards are real. And I said, okay. And I said, that sounds good. And I said, "So tell me about these tarot cards." "Well, a friend gave them to me and they have pretty pictures, but there's people sticking themselves in the head with a sword and stuff like that." And she said, "I'm afraid to just deal them out and see what comes. I want to send them back. I want to send them back to Amazon, you know?" And I said, "You should probably just do that and not spend another minute thinking about it. I mean, if you like the artwork, which I do, I think it's kind of cool and interesting. But you can put your belief system any place you want to in the universe. And why don't you pick a place that makes you feel good and empowers you? You know, go there." And she said, "Yeah, I'm sending them back."
Well, I think it depends on how you interpret them. Like I have tarot cards and used to do, pull cards, pull a card a day or something. And if you look at it as, you know, not as like written in stone kind of attitudes of like the same thing I guess you could say about a horoscope, but maybe the time I stopped reading my horoscope was I was a lot younger when I realized that it was somehow influencing me. With tarot cards, it became much more this thing where they would say today, you know, this is the energy that's out there or whatever. And I would sit there and say, okay, what tools can I gather just in case? Like, what could I, what tools could I gather within me that is just no matter what happens, I'm better able to just handle it. And that's how I would take it, not to say, okay, something bad is necessarily going to happen. I would be just like, okay, well, I'll just grab these few things and carry them along with me. And if nothing happens, that's great. And if not, I have them with me anyway, and I love them. And just how I would kind of interpret a lot of the tarot cards. I used to read for people quite a bit.
Well, see, that's an interesting thing. And was this before or after you had all of your degrees and sheepskins on the wall?
After,
Yeah. Okay. So now
far after.
that's interesting.
It
And
was
you,
far after because it was when I realized that there were certain things in the world I could just not explain. I could not explain. Like
right.
there are certain aspects of, I mean, I love scientific proof, but there's some things I just can't explain.
Well, see, that's an interesting thing too, because we are just meaning machines, aren't we? We got to have the answer. What's it all mean? And I would say this is in the domain of like feelings where they're just there. And so if you flip cards up, it doesn't matter if they have four suits and kings and queens, or if
Right.
they have all these other really cool pictures on them. I've had tea leaf readings, I've had my palms looked at. They told me that I was probably not going to make it to 30 because there's a little break in my so-called lifeline. I think I'm rocking that, okay? By the way. So what I ended up doing, I mean, I had my horoscope charted, and then I had it charted by somebody else, and I had it charted by somebody else. And this was getting fun, okay? So then I had a fourth person chart it, and then my mom says, "You want me to chart your horoscope?" You know what I ended up with? 5 different charts. No two of them looked alike. They weren't even close. So then I said, what's in this for the person doing the chart? There's something going on here. And it's fun. It's like a neat game, that was very enjoyable. None of them really tried to get anything over on me. And I do believe it was, sincere in their effort to try to explain using the, whatever they understood the correct way to chart my the alignment of the stars and the planets and my birth date and the hun. And so it was entertaining for me. And that didn't happen like in a weekend. I did that over a period of about 4 or 5 years, but almost all of them predicted I was not going to make it to 40. And here I am. Am I 40 yet?
Just barely. Because that reminds me too of like, because I've studied so many different things. I mean, I have runes, I have cards,
Mhm.
I have crystals, I have
Me too.
oils, I have everything there is, right? But then it's the one thing that you don't have. Oh no, that's ridiculous. Now that would be pushing it too far.
That can't possibly work,
That would
right?
never get too
So, but
far.
then you realize that my thought process, I came down to the understanding for myself that whatever people need to try to reach an inner wisdom that they just can't fathom that they would know or could get to, and if there's a tool that can help you get to that point, then I'm all for it. So I'm not going to poo poo anything ever
Yeah.
again, like whatever somebody wants to do.
So Lisa, I'm wondering if you get to an inner wisdom or you get to a point where you can decide something that you were on the fence
Right.
on, you know?
Right.
And there are people that need to have a second opinion on most things in their life and can never get it. And something like this, um, as long as it's not abusive by the person
Mhm.
doing the reading. But when somebody told me that they had studied reading tea leaves in Hong Kong for 7 years, I was like a little bit skeptical. So after we parted ways, I went and did a little bit of research on their background and everything. I don't think they ever left
Oh
Kentucky, you
God.
know?
But based on that, I mean, I think that yes, people a lot of times need affirmation of what they're doing,
Yeah.
and or that they're on the right quote unquote path. And I think that there are what I call signs that which are just might be words or messages which get repeated and all of a sudden. So I'll give this example. So I got online for Yom Kippur services with this synagogue that's very like out there for me
Yep.
and non-denominational, and I mean on the website it says God optional, so really like not where I would have normal been brought up to go. And so I'm sitting there and I get on Friday night and it's on Sunday night. Yom Kippur was Sunday night, and I'm sitting there and I'm going like I liked it, but then I got up Saturday morning to going, do I want to get on this again? And I wasn't sure. And I'm sitting there, and the rabbi gets on. First thing he says is he talks about how we're supposed to get up in the morning according to this ancient sort of wisdom in Judaism and roar like a lion. So I'm doing this. I've been doing this 4-part audio series, and I did a 3-part workshop that I was giving called Lion Hearted Radiance. And I'm sitting there going, okay, lion, interesting. This is really interesting. And I'm sitting there and they get to another portion, and one of the rabbis or one of the people who is participating gets up and reads a poem from this poet that I had, and I shared the same poem with my students last week. I never heard of that poem at all. I just found it and I was like, and that was like another message to me, like this, for whatever reason, I was supposed to be there.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I kind of just chuck it like that. It's like, for whatever reason, I can't explain, but I'm supposed to be here on the Zoom listening to these people. And it was beautiful, but it was really interesting as I sat there and I was like, should I be here? Should I not be here? Should I get online with my other friend that is a rabbi who I usually do services with, which is a lot more what I would have quote unquote been familiar with or comfortable even on a level, because this kind of made me feel uncomfortable. And then I
Yeah.
was like, okay, well, I'll take the signs that I'm supposed to be here.
Well, don't misunderstand me, okay? Because I am not telling you that psychic abilities and the ability to connect through time is not a real thing, because I've lived it my entire life.
Me
Remember,
too.
I'm the guy who had a dream when I was 12 years old about the woman I'm married to now for almost 50 years, okay?
Mhm.
So we actually knew that we were soulmates the night that we met. She knew it after I did, but when I walked across the room and I looked in her eyes, I said, I've been looking for you. And that was it. So
I
I'm
love it.
saying that there are people who dabble in it that probably, the best thing they can possibly do is affirm that people's feelings are good,
Mhm.
that no, you're not crazy and this is perfectly fine for you and you ought to just keep proceeding. But the folks who come up and say you're going to meet somebody who's dark and they're going to take you down a path and they're going to be really bad for your life, or you're going to be dead by the time you're 40 years old, it's like, I don't know if any of them are still alive, to be honest with you. I mean,
No, but I do think there's a lot to be said, because I do think that, I don't know. I think that there are people
100%.
that are connected with, I think a part of themselves, which we all have, but they've actually um, learned how to work with it. They incorporate it into their life. When I started to have a lot of sort of, I don't want to say, I would have images or thoughts for other people that I was working with or whatever. And I remember them like being really true. And I remember
Yeah.
calling my like guide or the woman who I went to, who was an intuitive body medicine healer. So I called her up and I said, Rosemary, like, what do I do? Is there a class I can take? Like me with the umpteen degrees. I'm like, can I get a degree in this? And she said to me, Jan, just meditate. Like, that's all you need to do. Like, there's no certification, just
Your,
meditate.
your cost of education dropped dramatically, didn't it?
Exactly. It's like, okay.
Well, I'll give you another example. I mean, throughout the 60s and 70s and 80s, the phone would ring and I'd know who it was before I picked it up, or I'd be thinking about somebody and they would call,
Oh, all the time.
and I, and when caller ID came out, I said, I've been doing this for years.
No,
But it
but
was
it's,
it was
people will say that's a coincidence. It's like, oh, okay, but I never believe. I'm like, I'll think of somebody, then all of a sudden I haven't heard from them in like forever, and all of a
Sure.
sudden they text me or something.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, you can explain away 2 or 3 incidences in a year, but if it's happening a couple of 3 times a week with different people, there's something going on.
Hmm.
I got over asking why or how a long time ago.
Hmm.
Just go with it.
But that's the thing too, you're going with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're picking up what they're throwing. You're open to receiving kind of thing.
Exactly.
Lisa, I call that being a good listener.
Yeah, that's right. Even
Yeah.
to the universe.
Being
Yep.
able to hear the unspoken and see the unseen.
Yep.
Or at least get in the right ballpark. So it's interesting to me at this moment as I sit here, and I'm using the word interesting to presence our good friend Ken. Um, and I think the word interesting allows you to take and kind of be special about the intentionality of what you're about to say, and I think it draws people in. Rarely does somebody say this is interesting and then give you something that's not interesting. So we're having this conversation about what really comes down to, we have a lot of words that we all have in common, but a lot of times there's no communication. And this allows for, the 6 senses to all be engaged at the same time in communication. And when one of them isn't working really well, then you start bringing 2 or 3 more online. And then before you know it, you've at least got yourself to the point where you can say back to the person what they're saying in their language, even if you don't yet understand it, you know? And that's a really important thing to be able to mirror, uh, so that somebody knows that you're at least paying attention to the level of you putting that energy into it. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Hmm.
And then the next step is to have the experience with them so that you do understand it. And we think that because people tell other people things that they should now get it and from now on be part of who they are, and it doesn't work that way. you know what's that old saying, tell me and I hear what you're saying, show me and I see what you're doing, but have me do it and now I understand.
Well, because with understanding, there is this element of when you do something, it becomes an experience.
Yes.
And so when you have an experience, you can understand something. That's just like, life in general. Like, if you talk to somebody who's lost a member of their family, for
Yeah.
example, and then all of a sudden, you understand them, you have empathy for them or whatever. But if you never lost a parent, you don't have that kind of understanding. And then all of a sudden, when you lose somebody like that, then all of a sudden that understanding comes on a different level. So when you talk about understew, that's what it reminds me of. It's kind of like reading a recipe versus like cooking it and tasting it.
Yeah, that I heard something that I thought was incredibly wise, and that was, acquaintances will send you a card, close friends and family will tell you that they're sorry for you and give you their sympathies, and your best friend will lie on the floor and curl up in a ball next to you.
Mhm. Absolutely.
And that takes a special kind of friend, I think.
And the other thing is, is we've been talking a lot about communicating about, and there is this element of just like the story I shared in the beginning of like this boy being in the same room as the dog, but not touching or whatever. And that's really gives me the idea of holding space, of just being able to be with someone and not necessarily have to fix something,
Yes.
which I think is hard for a compassionate human being to do because, we want, and I don't know, I don't want to sound sexist, but from all my male friends, they always say to me, men want to fix things. Women don't necessarily feel the need to fix something. So that might be wrong. So
Just change them. Just change them. Not fix them. Change them.
change
All
them,
right.
right? Right. Yeah, we don't want to fix them. We would just change them exactly. But still, yeah, that was good, Lisa.
Yeah. So all of you men that are listening right now, I'm gonna train you in a very powerful dialogue that you can have with your spouse. Where when she comes to you and she's tearing her hair out and she's jumping up and down and she's screaming and she's telling you can't even understand the words that she's saying, the best thing you can possibly do is say, honey, is this something you want me to actually do something about? Or you just want me to stand here and be with you while you're going through this? Give it a shot. Try it. You'll like it.
Very wise words, Bill.
Yeah. Again, it's training wheels until you get to that point where it's kind of expected that that behavior just comes automatically. But
Well,
there's
and
nothing wrong with having nothing
that's
wrong
actually
with
the Mars
touching.
Venus thing too. The book.
Yeah.
It-
So women could actually start a conversation with, I don't need you to fix anything. I just need to vent. I need to download.
Hmm.
yeah, but this requires adults to actually be awake while they're talking to people. We don't do that so well sometimes.
No.
You know?
Well, I was listening to, once listened to this woman who did a lot of like sort of different personalities. And in it, she got into this whole thing about men and women and how women should learn to be more direct sometimes. So women will say, something like they're hungry, but they won't say they're hungry. They'll turn to somebody and say, aren't you hungry? And when they say no, they get upset because they are hungry. Where really they should just say,
I'm
I'm
hungry.
hungry. I'm hungry. But that's not what comes out. So she gives this story of being on being on a road trip with her husband and how, she says, they're passing or they see an exit sign that says food. And she says, aren't you hungry? And he says no when they drive by. So she's sitting there fuming and not saying anything. And he's sitting there and thinking, gosh, this is a really great wine. She hasn't said anything for about 5 miles.
Yeah. Page 76 in the translator.
Yeah, it was really funny though, because I remember being like that, where I would like, when not saying, I'd say, honey, like, don't you want to do this? And he would say no, and I'd get upset. When
That's cute.
I didn't actually voice what I wanted.
Right.
So Jan and I have this kind of rhythm when we're driving on the highway interstates. And around here, it's like we've been in the car for a while. I'm a camel. I can go like, 10 hours and not have to stop. And every once in a while, she'll say, when we get close to an exit, would be a good idea if we found a gas station or something, right? Or other times I'll say to her, I'll say, hey, you have to go. And she'll go, no, I'm good for another few exits. Well, when we got to Nebraska, we get to an exit and I said, hey, hon, is it time? And she goes, no, I think I'm good. I said, you do realize the next exit is 75 miles. She said, let's pull in. There's a Dunkin' Donuts over there. Actually, I think it was a Shoney's, but same thing. So
Mhm.
after a while of communicating with each other, I just want to report we spend most of our time laughing at each other's stuff, just having a good old time. And these were the kinds of things, early on would have been showstoppers in many instances. But now the two of us can, by watching the other person have a little joy at our expense, get on the joy bandwagon, and kind of lighten the situation up a little bit. That's kind of a neat thing. There's a nice pause for you, Eric. Don't edit that one out because that was a good pause. So, ladies, we have a few more minutes. Are there any other things that you'd like to put out on the table? Maybe some nuggets for future conversations, or possibly something that's come to mind that while we were talking, you lost it for a little while and give it a moment to come back again now. I love hearing what both of you have to say on almost any subject. So,
Mhm.
I'm thinking of what Lisa said way in the beginning, and that was looking into people's eyes, because I don't know, something about that is not, makes people feel uncomfortable. And I think some of it might be the fact that we look at technology so much, so we're looking down constantly. So we don't really lift our heads to look eye level with people necessarily. It's kind of like we're very used to, this. So with our phones, and so we don't, or our technologies, so we don't. But I'm thinking about just exploring that, like, feeling of a, like, why it feels so awkward to people, and that kind of thing.
you're really not wrong. Okay. There's so much of our culture where eye to eye contact is almost antagonistic or aggressive. For instance, the famous line in An Officer and a Gentleman: "You eyeballing me, boy? Don't you eyeball me. You're not good enough to lick my boots. Now, don't you dare eyeball me, boy. I'll have you. I'll DOR you." You know, and I've noticed with kids today, high school students, college students, you know, folks that are in the service industry that are just doing it for their first time, they do not feel comfortable making eye to eye contact until there's a little joke, or as the French would say, a petit sourire, a little smile. And then when there's that comfort and the nonverbal language starts to make it okay to have eye contact.
Hmm.
And I don't think I did a really good Lou Gossett there, but
We got it.
hey, I'll tell you what, I love to master cliches because, believe it or not, cliches connect. Even if you don't have the same relationship to that little thing that I did that I do, it still was an attention getter. And I think with Gesundheit, or maybe not, maybe it was just BS. Who could tell? Gesundheit.
Thank you.
It's the weather.
But
Eye contact. I love it.
yeah.
And I was just reading something somewhere where they like the little synchronicities and stuff that we've all talked about noticing and stuff, and somebody referred to them as glimmers. So pay attention to your glimmers throughout the day. I think is a
Sweet.
see if you can notice them.
Yeah, and maybe practice making eye contact with people.
Hmm.
Like, just, think of it as a muscle that you have to exercise to, get comfortable with, or to get stronger with, and just, practice making eye contact with people.
And be willing to explain what the hell you're doing too. So
Just trying to connect here.
yeah,
I had
yeah.
a conversation with one of my clients just before we got on, who just got a cat. So the cat's adjusting. It's a rehoming, and so the cat's, I don't know, old, like 4 or 5. So she was talking about the fact that the cat does better when she's gets down, like when she's down lower as opposed to towering above
Yeah.
Hmm.
this animal. So, I think that whole, it's basically being at eye level, even if you're not looking at them. It just, because sometimes that's actually kind of too much for some people, for some animals, is like you can't look them in the eye. But it's just like to be there and be at a level that they don't feel threatened by. So to me, that eye contact is like, okay, well, can we look at it as being non-threatening?
I found that with kids and dogs too.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Absolutely.
the more you're willing to engage and get close. Of course, I haven't done this with all dogs, but I'm sure there are some that would be a really bad idea. But for most of them, when a dog is starting to look a little aggressive, you know, changing the posture and getting the tail to start doing this, and then you know that you're in, you know, in a good way. And kids are that way too. They can smell phoniness a mile away.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a double experience. I was walking through the church, and from around the corner, this big golden retriever came pounding. He wasn't on a leash or anything, but he just came up to me, and unbeknownst to me, but all of a sudden around the corner came this, it had to be 2-year-old little redheaded boy. And I was already down playing with the dog, and he just looked at me and he just started throwing me kisses without being
Aw,
prompted. It was the cutest thing on the planet.
that's amazing.
There's- yeah, a few months ago, a month ago or so, I was at my brother's, and so 4 of his grandchildren were there. And so oldest being, well, 6.5, and then the youngest being about 5 months. So I'm sitting there, and I spent my entire weekend, 4 days playing. Like, that was like, just, for me, it was so much fun. But just there, being able to be on their level, like, especially that's one reason that flexibility in yoga get really interesting.
There you go.
Because I can sit on the floor really easily. So I could get down on the floor or whatever.
Good for you. And you just gave me an idea. I've been having lots of issues with my knees locking up, especially when I sit in a restaurant booth where it's this much lower than where my knees are. And then I have to get up, and I get about 6 inches up, and then the knees just lock up. So some yoga is definitely in my future. No doubt about it.
Yeah. So it's just fun when you get on their level. I think there's also this sort of energetic thing that happens within us where we kind of, like, some of those barriers are broken down just by where you are in space. Like, all of a sudden being on their level, like that same kind of, height, just, there's a difference that happens.
And you do not have to like default to baby talk or uju buju
No.
and all that. That doesn't, no, just be who you are, and just like get in the space where they are, and share that space, And inhale
Good.
Exhale.
down to your toenails, and then exhale. Well, ladies, we've just frittered away another perfectly good hour, having fun and enjoying each other. And I can definitely feel my endorphin level is up. And I thank you for that. Any final goodbyes or any last words?
Glimmer.
Connect.
Eye contact. And I will again suggest to you, in the most powerful way I possibly can, there's someone in your life that really needs to hear from you, either by phone or in person. We're going to get away from texts and emails, okay? Show up and do something really good. Go hug somebody you love and tell them that your life works because they're in it. We're lighting the candle, a world that works. And that's all for today, folks. Bye for now.
Good week.
Have a great week.
You've been listening to Lighting the Candle, a world that works, part of the Xvadio Podcast Network. You can catch us each week, as well as the rest of the network, at xvadio.com/podcasts, as well as the Apple Podcasts app, Google Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, Audible, Amazon Music, and wherever you find podcasts.